I'd show you the inner workings of how I create a soft cover out of fabric. And this could be any fabric. Today I'm using hand painted fabric that is basically my cleanup rags. I use these, they're napkins, fabric towels that you can buy on Amazon. I keep them on the side of my desk, and anytime I need to clean up my paint from, instead of wiping my paintbrush off on a towel, I started wiping it off on these. Instead of a paper towel, I wipe it off on one of these towels. The fun thing is you end up getting things like this when you do that, right? And then you can stamp, messy rags, right? Where this is probably acrylic paint, definitely some watercolor and stuff like that. And then you can stamp on top of, or clean your stamps off on these, doodle on top of it, stuff like that as you're going, which is what I did here, as I actually had some leftover paint and I was stamping on paper, and I realized as I was trying to clean off my brush or off the bottle or the jar that I was stamping with that it made a neat design, so I just kind of went with it. Anyway, this in its of itself is a very beautiful thing, right? I've added, of course, some additional layers and marks and stamps and other things to it. So now I have a really beautiful, piece of fabric that has a lot of visual interest that I can use as a cover. You never wash this. It's got a little bit of glue on there, but the watercolor, if you wash this, would most likely run out. Again, if you have areas like this that you maybe don't like, it's okay. Stamp over it, put something on top of it, add some additional color in areas. So as I was kind of finished with this rag, I added some additional color, some additional stamps. I was testing out some stamps and things that I was using to make some additional marks and test out some different things, which I thought was really interesting. And now I'm going to use it for a cover. So I've mentioned the fact that I use Pellin inside my covers to give them a little bit more stability, to make them a little thicker and fluffier. Because again, this fabric is relatively thin, single layer cotton. And it would be fine on its own if you want something thin, but it's very flimsy, right? So I'm going to make it into a cover, give it a little bit more stability. I use this stuff called Pellin. It comes on a big roll. And it just looks like fluffy batting, right? It's not quilt batting because it's super thin. However, on one side it's kind of rough and scratchy because it's actually sprayed with glue, heat activated glue, and the other side is soft. So make sure that I just iron it. So I've just ironed it onto the paper or onto the fabric face down. So the sticky side, the scratchy side down. So it actually will adhere to the fabric. And that just gives me a little bit more weight to this thick fabric. So now I can work. It'll be a soft and squishy outside cover. Just a little, I have a lot of Pellin on hand because I used to use it in bag construction, and so it was a natural handbag construction. So I use it's kind of a natural fit. Use what you got on hand. If you don't have batting, quilt batting or something like that might work, but it's awfully thick. The thinnest quilt batting, you can get wool quilt batting that's thinner if you can't get Pellin, but they sell Pellin at any fabric store. Pellon. I'll put a link to it in down below, so you know exactly what I'm looking for. It's actually, it's thick enough to give your some stability, but thin enough that it's not going to make your outside cover too bulky. I mean, you obviously could do a whole quilt outside cover. Anyway, originally I was going to use this as I'm going to do a fold over cover, right? And my paper inside is about 8x8 or 9x9, I think. I have some watercolor paper that I took out of another book that I didn't like the cover. Anyway, I was going to use this as the outside cover, which I might still, but I want to play with piecing together and make this the inside cover. So when you open it up, because you spend more time probably looking at the inside cover with everything. So I thought that would be really fun on the inside, maybe. I wanted to toy with this idea of using other things, other fabrics, because I had a whole bunch of additional fabrics and things. These are some fabrics. I have a whole bunch of silk, because again, I used to make clutch handbags out of hand-painted silk. So I have a whole bunch of silk I was playing with. I believe this was just watercolor and sprays. And then stamping on top of it with some speedball. I got some new stamps the other day. So I've got a piece of that, lace, of course, leftover pieces of, the thing that I just cut out. Here's another, there's another of those paint cloths. There was this really cool drip pattern from something I was working on where it was used to soak up that. Here's another one of those messy rags that I mentioned where it's just, this is just paint, that I cleaned up, cleaned brushes off. So that makes a really beautiful moment. You're not going to wash these. So in addition to that, I've got, again, this is another messy rag where I was testing out stamps. There's the more messier side of it. And then I tested out some stamp and things like that, which I thought was drawing around them and all of that. So that is a possibility of stuff that I could add in here. But I thought I would do some layering for the outside. And in that case, and layer in strips maybe, and or chunks, which this was down here in the south. But to give some visual interest to, I'm essentially just going to sandwich these together and then stitch on the edge and leave a natural edge. And I might actually stitch across and or, kind of like quilting the thing. Again, it does make it a little bit puffy, but if you have lace, I will probably cut these in smaller chunks because I want some overlapping patchwork kind of vibe going on, but I'm going to get started. Use what you have because sometimes you'll have especially if you do any kind of sewing, you'll have scraps of pieces. So I had a friend's daughter who I helped the other day. We had to hem the bottom of her prom dress, so I have pieces of purple silk, and I would never, probably would have normally have thrown this stuff away, but I held on to, the little scraps from the bottom of the dress and things like that, that now I can add in as strips into some future, hold on to it for the purpose of using it in some sort of art projects. But those little, strips and the use of fabric, it's kind of the same idea of the other thing that I buy that is really beautiful. This is called sari ribbon. It's what they stitch to the bottom of their saris in India. Trim out a sari in India. These come on, I get them on Etsy from a company there in all kinds of beautiful, and they're just beautiful embroidered pieces. And they are absolutely gorgeous, I think, to use in things. So I'm going to put some strips of my sari ribbon in. It is kind of see-through, so keep that in mind as you're where you're layering this stuff. It was really beautiful, particularly. Anyway, you could use pieces of old clothing. Well, you know, you've got a piece of clothing that maybe isn't good enough to go to Goodwill, but chunks of lace. This is probably just a lace handkerchief, maybe. I keep a couple of bins of a variety of stuff. I have tried eco dyeing fabric with coffee and other stuff. So these make really good grungy backgrounds. This is that same towel material. The eco dyeing didn't turn out so great, but if you want a dark grungy, you can also stamp on top of darker fabric. So I think this was an old shirt or something that I then tried. I was working with speedball and stamps. You know, I ended up using some of that. And also, there's just, commercially printed fabrics, which are really beautiful in and of themselves, right? So keep all your little scraps because you never know when a scrap might come in handy. You just keep a bin with those scraps in it. So it's clearly some pollen stuck to it. So it's fun not to diffuse them down because then you end up with a nice kind of raw edge. So that's fun. Love anything that's batik. So right now I'm just layering strips in with a purpose, not very purposeful, but will eventually rearrange them enough fabric to kind of cover everything. So let's start here. Just some of these. Make sure that let's trim the outside up later. Just gonna start layering these in. Right now I'm just layering the fabric on in a way that I have just strips and everything is overlapping. And just builds it up with layers, right? And as you start to layer on a whole bunch of variety of different colors and things like that, then you'll start to see, there's an area that maybe I don't want this piece to be that long. I don't know. Maybe I do like that I overlayer the entire part. It's kind of cool. Curls up a little bit. That's okay. This is going to be an area where I have an issue because again, the two pieces don't overlap. So that's what I mean by be real mindful of how the things are overlapping because I'm going to need, there's not a lot of room here, so I'm going to need to lay something on top of that. So that way when I stitch things down, I can't see under. Be able to see under the edges. Been working a lot with teal and purple and navy blue lately. So that's why I ended up with a whole lot of fabrics that were kind of the same colorway. But I mean, you could pick any fabric that you want, right? Any color scheme that you want. Again, utilizing old clothes and things like that. You know, it might be a great way to preserve something that you really love. Piece of, and that's where like kids' clothes and stuff like that come into play. Feel free to overlayer areas where you've already layered to add some additional visual interest. This is a really big piece. Let me move this in here. Just like this piece. Okay. And just to hold it all together so it doesn't move on me, I am going to. It would have been great at this point to do another layer of Helen, but I think that's going to make it too thick because then I could just iron this down, and it would move on me. But it is unlikely. Another layer of Helen might make this too thick. It's up to you. You could be the judge on yours that you're making, but I think another layer of Helen is going to be difficult. So I'm just going to go in here and strategically put some pins in. This is really just an effort to hold all of this down so I can get it over to the sewing machine. It doesn't move on me too much in the process. Now some of these pieces, it's really just the goal is to hold it together long enough for me to stitch this stuff down. We'll see what it looks like. It may look cool, it may be completely stupid, I don't know. I think a bunch of like embroidered fabrics would be really cool. We'll go through and clean up. Don't worry about the edge being uneven at the moment. We'll go ahead and we'll go through and clean it up. I cut the edge, by the way, the pellin, and I left about maybe a quarter of an inch of fabric beyond the pellin. Don't necessarily, I want a nice raw edge. I'm going to be able to pull the edge and rough it up a little bit. And so you could absolutely piece this together and do a clean edge if you wanted to. That was just not necessarily what I was going for. I wanted the raw edges of everything. And I'm going to sew and leave probably 1/8 of an inch again so that it frays a little bit. I think I'm probably going to stitch this down with navy blue thread because I want that high contrast. I have a lot of the pinks and purples, but the navy blue is kind of the anchor. Does that make sense? To kind of give it that contrasty look. Okay, this is where I'm stuck. I have sewn this together. There's the inside that we put together earlier, which is fine. Don't love it though. I really love the outside. And so now I'm stuck as to whether this should be the inside or the outside. Because again, I was going to make it that go this way, right? But I'm not, this is very busy. So I'm not sure what I want to do with this yet. Either treat it in some way or something. I don't know. Essentially, here are my paper signatures, which is beautiful watercolor paper. And then I have dyed papers and pieces of various different types of paper, book page, things like that mixed up in these signatures. And so essentially they're going to go in here, right? And this becomes a wrap for the outside, which is slightly larger, significantly larger than the inside. But essentially it's going to go like that, right? I have squared all of that up. My problem is I don't really love this, and I'm not sure yet what I want to do about the closure. The busyness of this is probably what I think is throwing me off. It's all tonal with the exception of, a few areas. So I thought about adding in some lace. I like this better. This breaks up the busyness. That's too busy. It needed something. So I thought maybe something like this over the top gives some visual interest that breaks up the monotony of this. The reality is this it's really just a cover to cover up and protect the important part, which is inside. It's nice having this on the inside though, the splatter page on the inside, because if I do end up dripping paint or whatever, it's not a big deal, right? Because these are watercolor pages. I can just continue to use those messy pages. It did cover up, the beauty of that part, but I can, again, this is not precious fabric by any means. And the fun part is visual, right? So, yep, I'm thinking this, like this. I'm going to attach that to here. I need something, some sort of clasp, maybe a tie, something. I usually use this hot pink silk as my tie, and then you have, I could tie it into a bow on the outside, and then, it kind of makes sense, or it kind of gives a visual interest, but I don't know if I want to do that here. Anyway, there's what the back would end up looking like. I ended up sewing all my strips down, and then I realized I had a lot of like little pieces and things like that I was worried were going to end up coming off. So I just went back and forth with the sewing machine, every couple of inches or whatever. There was no rhyme or reason to the distance. And it wasn't being super precious about it, but it just gives it kind of, again, it's nice and thick and sturdy and fluffy. Okay, I'm going to stitch this down and we're going to go with it. And then I'll have to figure out what I want to do as far as a closure is concerned. Okay, sometimes less is more. I have this stitched down. I stitched down and across the sides to keep those. I'm going to leave this part. I have stitched in here, but I'm going to leave this kind of frilly because I like that. It kind of sticks up, right? And then I was trying to decide what I want. Do I want to put anything on top? I was looking through my stash of variety of different patches and things like that. And I thought, wouldn't that be cute to put, a couple of patches on? But then I was like, this has a lot of drama going on, so I don't know. I'm going to save these patches because if this was navy blue and this is navy blue, maybe. And then again, I don't have anything in here that's really red, but the purple, yes. So no patches necessarily that go together, and I may end up adding something later. I do think I'm going to add the button to kind of hold it all together. And then I was like, okay, well, how do I sew a buttonhole? But I don't want to disrupt the lace. And then I thought, it'd be really nice if it just kind of sat like right here where I need a loop of some sort. I thought about elastic. I do have, and I may go look for some, but then I remember that I cut off some pieces of this shiny purple fabric, and it was, kind of just in the trash bin. And again, in an effort to reuse some of the stuff. So now I'm going to attach this and then we'll be good to go. And I'll have to figure out my spine to attach the pieces into the spine.